Purity Hamunakwadi, as well as Professor Sijakula Mbanga, who we know was in the plenary. And they are going to discuss local economic development as a pivot for creating resilient and self-sustaining human settlements in South Africa. I would imagine that the logic or the logical sequence of the presentations was to start with that overarching presentation that was going to be done by Dr. Hayanga, that was going to set the stage for what the challenges are, and out of which we would now start to understand the specific issues that the other speakers are going to speak about. But given that sort of constraint that we've experienced of Dr. Hayanga's absence, let us go ahead then and invite Dr. Purity and Professor Mbanga to present on local economic development as a pivot for creating resilient and self-sustaining human settlements in Africa. Thank you very much. Is Dr. Purity and Prof. Mbanga here? Again, a quick scan of who is sitting in the room does not show them to be here. All right, what do you propose? Musa has also left. Lerato, do you have any insights as to whether we have Dr. Purity and Prof. Mbanga? Are they expected?
Good morning, Prof. I think I saw from the chat box, I think Dr. Purity had sent a chat, but with regards to the attendance, I had not been updated on anything, but I saw Doctor on the chat box.
All right.
Yes, Doctor was here. She had some audio issues, so she will leave and rejoin. But while we're working on that, maybe we can request our next speaker to continue.
All right. Our next speaker is Mr. Al Gurria. He is the Director of Nonprofit Management and Social Entrepreneurship and Assistant Professor of University of Baltimore. Prof, we are going to ask you, hopefully not too abruptly, to step into the fray, given the absence of the other two presenters as we try and set them up. Your presentation on urban development through social innovation and multi-sector partnerships is very much looked forward to. I am particularly enthused to hear what these concepts are introducing in terms of the broader view of inclusivity. Welcome, Mr. Gurria.
Thank you. And you know, my apologies. I agree with you in terms of the way the session was set up to start from more of a macro perspective and move into some isolated examples, such as the one I'm providing from the city of Baltimore. Is there by any chance the slides that were provided set up to be displayed?
I'll open them up for you just now.
Okay.
While Musa sorts out the slides, Mr. Guria, may I suggest as a way that we are going to proceed, that we have been granted 20 minutes each per presenter. And what I would like to suggest is that Lerato, who is assisting me in chairing this session, indicates on the chat when we are at the 15-minute mark, so that we can give you 5 minutes to pace yourself so that you end your presentation at a neat rather than sort of abrupt stop when the bell rings. So I think that would be useful, so that you bear at the back of your mind the amount of time that you have left, and hopefully that would be helpful. I am also hoping that while you're presenting, that I'll get a better sense through the chat from Musa what to expect as far as the other speakers are concerned, and that might have implications for availability of a little more time should you require it, and so forth. So let's play it by ear, but for the time being, we will indicate at the 15-minute mark, and I hope that's a useful way of ensuring that we sort of, it feels neat. Thank you. Dr. Guria, please go ahead.
Sure. As was stated, my name is Dr. Guria. I am the Director of Nonprofit Management and Social Entrepreneurship Program, which is a graduate program at the University of Baltimore. And my area of scholarship centers around banking, finance, and community development. So what I am discussing today is urban development that's currently being taken place in West Baltimore, which is a city in state of Maryland in the United States. And as I'll talk through in my presentation, kind of talk to you a little bit about the city, the state that it's currently in, and some of the challenges that takes place in terms of development in a predominantly Black community located in West Baltimore. If we can move to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. And I apologize for the animation in the slides. I thought I'd have control over it, but that's fine. I'll just give it a nod when it's time to move over. But in the United States, the urban city, probably since the turn of the 19th, 20th century, has been the economic base for most regions across the country as we moved from an agrarian type economy to more of an industrial based economy. Next bullet, please. So in the 19th century, only about 3% of the American population lived in cities. So prior to the 20th century, there was a very small percentage of the American population that actually lived in cities. The majority of the country lived in rural America. So it's only been since about the early part of the 20th century, the last 100 years or so, that we've seen this heavy increase in concentration in populations in urban cities. Next slide, next bullet, please. And you can advance the next, one more. And we'll just set the slide up and go back, and then let me work through it. So in the United States, a period of time between 1916 and 1970 is known as the Great Migration. During this period of time, African Americans, Blacks in the United States, moved heavily out of the segregated South into the North, Northeast, and West Coast of the United States and concentrated in urban cities across the United States. So prior to this period of time, obviously the condition of the country didn't allow for it, but post-1916, Great Migration, heavy concentration of Blacks in urban cities across the country. And Baltimore, Maryland is one of those cities that received this influx of population into its area. There are two major federal policies that really go towards urban development or the lack of urban development in the last 100 years within the United States. One is the Great Depression in the late 1920s that brought about the New Deal, that changed the dynamics of federalism in the United States. And what I mean by that is that relationship between the national government and state and local governments. Prior to this period of time, the national government did not have a lot of involvement in state and local economics and commerce. During the Great Depression and a series of legislations known as the New Deal that came about after that changed the dynamics of federalism in the United States, and the federal government, through cooperative federalism, became more involved in the development of communities, cities within states and local jurisdictions. The second set of major policies that had this implementation is called urban policy. In the 1960s, after we've had this massive migration to urban cities, followed by decades of discrimination, blight, depression, and so forth, urban cities had created what was known at the time as an urban crisis, high concentration of poverty, mostly in concentrated Black African-American communities across the United States. The federal government sought to address this through a series of policies known as urban policy. Next slide, please. And you can hit, there you go. So on the left, what we see is a number of these urban policy initiatives that the federal government attempted to address the blight and economic state of urban communities across the United States. Programs like Urban Renewal, New Frontier, the Great Society, which was Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty initiative, Model Cities, another failed federal program. The creation of a housing and urban development was another initiative taken on by the federal government, general revenue sharing, and community development block grants, which are still active in today's environment, just in the shifted dynamics in terms of how they distribute them. And then the agents and tools that was leaned upon in terms of addressing the urban crisis, housing development, in predominantly Black urban cities across the United States, were leaned on from nonprofit and philanthropic foundations, corporate responsibility, which is that need that the private sector should have, local housing authority, as well as a host of private sector initiatives. And what I mean by that is, in the United States, one of the aims the federal government took to address is try to incentivize private developers to do the work in the community to rebuild urban communities across the United States. And tools such as new market tax credits, tax incremental financing, low-income housing tax credits, or some of these private sector initiatives that the federal government tried to create to spur the type of development that was much needed because of lack of investment in many of these urban communities across the country, and Baltimore City being one of them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So just to give you some information on the city of Baltimore, currently Baltimore has a population of about 600,000 people, of which 63% is Black. If we go back 50, 60 years, Baltimore had a population of nearly 1 million. So we have seen a decrease in population. It's one of the highest segregated cities in the country. Black ownership is approximately 42% compared to 72% of whites. And that's a significant statistic because we know that home ownership in the United States is the #1 category as it relates to transfer of generational wealth. And then as we talk about poverty, home ownership is one of those gateway transactions that we see. Black unemployment is 3 times that of whites. and the median income of Blacks is half that of whites. Within the Upton community itself, which represents a small community in West Baltimore, it's over 90% Black. However, the child poverty rate is over 66%, and Upton currently has over 1,000 vacant homes and abandoned units. If you can see the picture in the bottom right, we see blocks and blocks of row homes that are boarded up and abandoned within the Upton community as kind of an indication of the level of blight and disinvestment that takes place, that's currently taking place in the community of Upton. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this slide just kind of highlights some of the defining definitions of what social innovation is. And I don't want to take up a lot of our time because we're running a little behind on time already as it relates to what social innovation is. But obviously in Upton, there's a considerable amount of social innovation taking place as it relates to urban development. Next slide, please. All right, so, all right. I'll just keep talking, and you can advance the slides, keep up, because I don't want to lose too much time waiting for the slides. But so the following a series of riots that took place during the summer of 1968, across the United States, the Upton community created what was known as the Upton Planning Committee. The Upton Planning Committee, also UPC as an acronym, was really designed to oversee development in the community. Over decades of just being on the sideline, the Upton Community Planning Committee decided to kind of take things into its own hands in 2005 under its new leadership and developed a new master plan. After a couple of different iterations of a master plan for the community, in 2016, the Upton community developed a new master community plan known as the Historic Upton Neighborhood Master Plan, with its guiding principle as development without displacement. With the authority of the city of Baltimore, which is a key aspect in this. So we have the Upton Planning Committee, which is a nonprofit organization, limited resources in Baltimore. Under the authority of the city of Baltimore, was given the rights to development within the Upton community under the Historic Upton Neighborhood Master Plan, which focused on a community-centric approach to community development with development without displacement. And what we mean by that is to be able to develop its community with the intention of being able to sustain its legacy residents, which are those residents who are from the community. Historically in the United States, when we've seen development in communities, we've seen communities turn over and change when new investment comes in, whether it's from gentrification or just outside capital flooding the community and displacing existing residents. So the community-centric approach to Upton's redevelopment was development without displacement, to develop a model where we could redevelop the community, where the community residents would benefit from it as opposed to being displaced. Next slide, please. I think we have a couple of visuals next. Here is an image of the model, development without displacement. Part of the master plan, which focuses on both job and economic development, as well as commercial development and housing, and understanding that all three of these characteristics are important in the revitalization of a community. The Upton Planning Committee started with the housing piece, understanding how important home ownership is as it relates to generational wealth and poverty. The development of the partnerships of both the private sector as well as all levels of government, or key characteristics of it. And a community-driven reinvestment fund was something also developed by the Upton Planning Committee, which allows it to support existing homeowners as well as new homeowners in the community. All of this is done with the lead of a nonprofit organization with the focus of development without displacement at its core. Next slide. So here we see a local nonprofit, which with limited resources, but through the credibility and authority of the city of Baltimore, actually controls the development within its community, which is essential because therefore it allows them to decide what projects get developed and what projects don't. The Upton Planning Committee holds monthly developer meetings where the existing developers will present on the status of projects, as well as proposed developers will present projects to the community. And then the community, through the nonprofit, which is managed by local community members, can decide the developmental direction of the community. In addition, as part of the master plan, the Upton Planning Committee created what's known as a Community Development Corporation, a CDC, to oversee the development of the community. So now you have the Planning Committee, which oversees the direction and holds regular charrettes to get the opinion of the community, and not just an artificial seat at the table as a show of good faith, but actually a decision-making body that's calling the direction of the development within the community. And then as this Upton CDC, which was created as the implementation arm of the master plan development. Next slide. So a couple of key characteristics: partnerships with the city, which gives them authority, which also gives them credibility and control of the community. Collaborations with the local planning department, which actually provides the Upton Planning Committee with real estate and abandoned properties to be re-renovated and put on the market. Funding sources from the state and federal level of governments to create subsidies to allow properties to be affordable for community residents, because obviously housing affordability is a key characteristic for preventing displacement. Federal funding programs such as community development block grants, but also the need to be able to bring in private developers. And as we talked about before, some of the initiatives that are set up, but at the end result from a historical perspective has always been private sector developers come in, develop for profit, but without the intent of community or sustainability. This way, the nonprofit controls what projects get undertaken, and private developers then have to agree to the nonprofit's desired level of production and outcome, as well as the financing that's constricted by the nonprofit. And then foundations and nonprofits that also work in this chain, whether that's first-time homebuyer programs or subsidies that are created to go along with it. Next slide, please.
Dr. Guria, just intruding there to mention that we are at the 15-minute mark.
Okay, thank you. So what you have here is some visuals of some of the projects being undertaken in Upton. The row on the top shows some of the abandoned boarded up houses. The front left visual is the front of the property. The top middle is the back of the property, as well as some construction project being cleared in the top right. And then the bottom row kind of shows some of the post-development projects that we're working on through this model. Again, the front of the building on the bottom left, the back of the building next to that, and then two interior shots on the bottom. Next slide, please. These are some additional projects being developed in Upton. Again, top row, pre-development projects. And again, in the community of Upton and West Baltimore, we have rows and rows, and what I mean, blocks and blocks of aborted, abandoned buildings. That through this process, we've been able to work through the city, taking projects back, redeveloping, and putting community residents as homeowners in these projects. Along the bottom, we see some post-development pictures from projects that are done in Upton. Next slide, please. And this is just some of the interior shots from some of the homes being redeveloped that we're working on in Upton as well. Next slide. And this is just a quote from African-American historian and educator. It says that you cannot expect any individual, group, or organization to do for us what we can do for ourselves. And when we think about that in the context of Upton, for decades, a community that has been discriminated against, disinvested, neglected in West Baltimore, predominantly Black community, historically has looked to whether it was the federal government or initiatives or programs to come in and develop the community. And when we look back across the country, that model has not been successful. However, when we take control of our own communities, and I'm not saying that's an easy approach to do, but in the Upton case, where the Upton community, through a nonprofit with limited resources, was able to gain control of development initiatives through community involvement, and was able to create multi-sector partnerships to bring about positive change and development in a way that's sustainable, community-centric, and does not displace its community residents. Next slide, I think it's our last slide. And so through social innovation, the Upton Planning Committee and its CDC has created this new model. It currently has over 100 homes under construction, has leveraged over $100 million in the last couple of years. It's began the process to directly source projects. So going forward, the Upton Community Planning Committee and its CDC will not only source, but develop its own projects, both commercial, residential, and mixed use. And what once seemed like an endless battle against disinvestment, disenfranchisement, neglect, and discrimination is now an example of the possibilities that exist through multi-sector collaborations when a common goal for the greater good is the focus. That's all I have. I look forward to your questions or any discussion and dialogue that you might have. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Guria. A lot of food for thought, actually, and I'm going to invite the participants in the room to please ask questions. If you could also, while you think about your question and another person is busy asking theirs, you could also place your question on the chat. And Lerato, if I could ask you to please draw my attention to any questions that I might overlook so that we do justice to the presentation by Dr. Guria. If I might kick off with a question myself, Dr. Guria. My takeaway from your presentation is probably the puzzlement around how the discomfort of the relationship that generally exists between nonprofit organizations and the government, whether that's in the form of central government or local authorities, which is generally what we tend to feel in South Africa. In the experimentation with that relationship, often the outcomes are that the relationship is adversarial and therefore not very much comes out of it, or it's collaborative but experimental, so its scale tends to be very small. maybe what I'm wanting to ask as the first question is, what were the mechanics around how this nonprofit took a lead, but not only took a lead, but was actually allowed to take a lead in what seems to be what I have described as an adversarial relationship? How did that come about? Was it contested over time, or was it just one of those relationships that somehow the nonprofit proposes and it finds a willing government and the collaboration sort of kicks off immediately? What was the sort of lead up to that place where the nonprofit was able to take lead?
Yeah, sure. And you know, if you can recall, the Upton Planning Committee was actually created in 1968. And I'm quite sure in 1968, when the Upton Planning Committee was formed, the intent was for it to be a lot more involved in the development of the community, 50, 60 years ago. However, that did not take place because of a lot of those characteristics that you're pointing out: adversarial relationship, not really in control of decision making, lack of resources, leverage, those type of things that took place and was really the norm for 30 or 40 years until the last couple of decades, when a more responsive relationship was developed with local government, as well as a common focus. When I talk about the blocks and blocks of abandoned buildings in the city of Baltimore, that is a loss of revenue for the city of Baltimore. So when we talk about things like blight, crime, education, and so forth, eventually the city gets to a point where they're looking for solutions. And there was a nexus where there was a willing local government, there was a persistent nonprofit who had cultivated a relationship over decades to be able to seize the opportunity when it presented itself to step in and take control of some decisions and direction within its community. So it was not something that was thought about, created, and put in place. It was more of a progression over 40 or 50 years to be able to cultivate those relationships. And when the opportunity presented itself, it was in place and in position to take advantage of it. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I believe you're on mute.
Sorry, any other questions for Dr. Guria, participants? Anybody else with a question?
Good morning, Dr. Greer.
Oh.
I do have a question. The renovated properties in West Baltimore, are those purchased through an auction through the city government, or did you get the properties through like a federal program? So
these are properties, abandoned vacant properties that have then been returned to the city. The city has the authority over those. So the city then, the CDC doesn't necessarily take possession of the property. They have the authority to basically transfer those properties to assigned private developers. So what will happen is the city of Baltimore will allot the CDC 30 homes, and then we'll take those 30 and we'll break them up into 3 different clusters and assign 10 to 3 different developers, and then we'll create arrangements with those developers for the development of those properties and the sale of them.
Okay. Do the developers have a timetable to renovate those properties and have them ready to be habitable for new tenants? Yeah.
So, I mean, we create a development plan up front. Obviously, that's not always adhered to, especially in the last couple of years with COVID. We've had some delays and things of that nature. But the one thing about using the private sector is that they are motivated, because if you think about it, the private developer has to put their cash in first.
Right.
So the motivation to have the property closed, transitioned, and sold is an underlying principle for them in their development of the projects.
Okay.
Any other question from any other of the participants? Two more questions to Dr. Guria before we move on. Dr. Guria, let me just pose this one, trying to set parallels between this sort of model that you have adopted for West Baltimore and what happens in South Africa in the context of self-help programs where you want to involve what would be the beneficiaries of housing in the process of creating the housing, renovating the housing, or even, as we say, creating it from scratch. One of the big issues surrounding particularly the very low levels of poverty has to do with the high opportunity cost of people getting involved in projects where they would possibly have to lose out on their livelihood activities, which is a high cost to themselves, or have a feeling that because they have an involvement in something that is essentially the government's responsibility, providing them with housing, if they take over some of those roles, then there's a sense that they should be remunerated for those roles. So it becomes that kind of debate where, should we really be doing for ourselves what the government should at no remuneration to ourselves? We don't want to get involved in that kind of project, or simply that they can't, because when they wake up in the morning, they go and do a daily job that pays for their meal or for their whatever their needs are for that day. So my question is, how were these issues, or are they probably covered by the social wage that is probably available to many low-income households in Baltimore? Or was this also an issue that you needed to overcome, and how would it have been overcome in this context where people have real bread and butter issues and now they have to abandon those and the remuneration that comes with those in order to get involved in a renewal project or whatever you want to call it?
No, I mean, that scenario still applies in the United States and West Baltimore. I mean, anytime you're talking about low-income communities, there's always a challenge that's going to exist in terms of a trade-off that people have to consciously make. The one thing that in the model that's presented, the nonprofit in essence is a representative of the people, of the end user, of the community. And that's something that's unique that doesn't historically take place. When we look in the United States at most development, it's either led by the government or led by the private sector, or what they call PPP, public-private partnerships, but still exclude the community as a decision maker in the process. This particular model puts the nonprofit, who is a representative of the people, at the center of the table. Now, there still takes considerable amount of work to get community input and information and share, but that in this model becomes the responsibility of the nonprofit to be able to share, whether it's through charrettes and other programs, information processes. And again, the nonprofit is made up of various community organization representatives who sit on the board of the Upton Planning Committee. So that's kind of a proxy to the community that's being driven through the nonprofit. But it is definitely a challenge that always exists in low-income communities. I mean, the residents who are eventually the beneficiaries of this type of program and model. They work, they take care of their families. They're usually the lowest wage and longest hours and transportation challenged and technology and everything else. But that's where the Upton Planning Committee and the nonprofit takes on that role of being the representative in these negotiations, in this development, and in this process to make sure their best interest is always at the forefront.
Thank you. I can see Dr. Hamuna Kwadi has joined us, so we will move to her presentation in the next moment or so. Any last question from the participants in the room? All right, one last one from me, Dr. Gurie. In your own estimation, to what extent is this a replicable model? Something that could be replicated, not just to other parts of Baltimore, but, you know, even statewide, never mind countrywide, because I would imagine, you know, many big cities have abandoned buildings. They have people in need. They have people who are willing to do for themselves, as you said in that quote, who are not necessarily wanting a handout, but some kind of collaboration and some leadership to achieve this. To what extent is the model replicable, and what are the sort of circumstances that lend themselves to that? Just based on this as a case study, what is our takeaway as what you need to cultivate to make this something that can be replicated? Yeah, so replicable is much more achievable than scalable. And what I mean by that is this model, it can and will be replicated in other urban cities across the United States. And that's a process that's already starting. We've already communicated with other communities across the country that have already started the groundworks to lay down that process. The challenge is less about replicableness than it is about scalableness. The challenge with this type of model is when you try to scale it too big or too fast, what happens is you encourage large-scale capital infusion, which winds up resulting in what we call gentrification, neighborhood turnover. So you constantly have to weigh the benefit against, I think in our slide, we said we currently have about 100 units in production and about $100 million leveraged in investment. But there's thousands of units that are abandoned and vacated. If we got, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in capital infusion, we could speed up the process. But as a result, we'd be bringing in new capital as well as new residents, new interests, new investment, new capital, and we'd literally be turning over the community, which is what we're trying to avoid to do. Too many of our communities in the United States have totally turned over, which again, we call gentrification, where those residents have been displaced and just moved to a different area, and it creates the same problems that we were trying to fix in the first place. So the ability to be able to replicate it, I'm not saying it's easy, but it can be done. It's more of a challenge when we start talking about trying to scale it. All right, thank you very much. We thank you very much. I suppose there's a lot more we could ask, but given the limitations of time, maybe we should also find out from the symposium planners whether there's a way we could engage on these issues outside of just these presentation spaces, because certainly that's a model that one would want to understand in more detail, where you weren't rushed to give us a synopsis in 20 minutes. Thank you very much, Dr. Gurie. We move on, and I can see that Musa has been trying to speak to me. Musa, please give me an indication of who goes next. I can see there are still some audio challenges with one of the speakers. So who are you suggesting we go with for the time being?
If you can check with Dr. Purity if she's good.
All right. Dr. Purity, are you able to hear us? And can you respond so that we can see if we can hear you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, super, super. Thank you so much. All right. Dr. Purity was the second presenter in the sequence of presentations for our group. And we now invite Dr. Purity. We have just had Dr. Guria, who was the third speaker, go first, but now we come back to you. Dr. Purity is collaborating with Professor Mbanga on her presentation, and her presentation is Local Economic Development as a Pivot for Creating Resilient and Self-Sustaining Human Settlements in South Africa. Thank you, Dr. Purity. Go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I greet you all. So I would ask so that you can flag the PowerPoint because I am using my phone. I couldn't connect here. Yes, thank you very much. I'm representing Nelson Mandela University. So it goes like this. The theme is local economic development as a pivot for creating resilient and self-sustaining human settlements in South Africa. So as a point of departure, I would like to define what human settlements are. So we can go to the next slide. Human settlements, they are dwelling places that are connected to human and productive activities. So it talks of the social, the economic, the material, the organizational, the spiritual aspect, and the cultural elements. So human settlements, they actually talks of the totality of human community. So it can be an urban area or a rural area. It can be big or small. It can be a formal settlement or an informal settlement. So it's in various forms. So when we look at it, when we are talking about human settlements, we are saying that where people live, they should be in a position to work in that place. They should be in a position to play. Those are recreational facilities. They should also be in a position to be able to pray in that area. So it entails the totality of the human community. It does not only speak of providing houses. So we can go to the next slide. And it's the statistic of South Africa 2020. They actually say that 84% of South African households lived in formal dwellings, and 11.4% they reside in informal dwellings, and 4.3% they reside in traditional dwellings. But we have to note that the South African government has been providing houses for people. So we can actually argue that to say that South Africa has the capacity to produce housing development, but they lack the aspect of providing human settlements. Because as earlier on, I said that human settlements, it entails the totality of the human community. So providing houses alone is not enough, because people, they need jobs, they need to be supported in their various activities that they are involved in. So we can go to the next slide. It talks of the policy guidelines. So South Africa and other African countries, they subscribe to international treaties, and these international treaties, they speak of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs 2030. So as well, the South African government is also embarked on the same journey to try and implement the Sustainable Development Goals. So when you are speaking of the Sustainable Development Goals, we can go to the next slide. When we are speaking of the Sustainable Development Goals, we talk of in relation to this paper, we are arguing that South Africa should also be in a position to have or to create resilient, sustainable, safe and inclusive cities, communities and human settlements. So, but there have been a number of challenges that have been working against that cause. We can go to the next slide, and the next slide, it talks of the human settlement challenges in planning, designing, and implementation. So as you look at it, a number of aspects, they can actually work against producing resilient and sustainable and inclusive cities in South Africa. And one of it is urbanization. Urbanization is actually gave birth to undesirable urban form, and this has resulted in the formation of informal settlements in urban and peri-urban areas. This has affected the Pan-African city to a greater extent, because when people live in informal settlements, these places, they don't have all the services that are required to support human livelihoods. So we can see that also the absolute planning and design schemes. You can go to the next slide. There are absolute planning and design schemes that has been in place. So these are planning and design schemes that has been there. They prevented low-income households and human settlements from achieving targets of sustainability, resilience, and inclusion, because these current settlements that we have now, they actually depend on the historical outcome of the planning practices that have been there during the apartheid system. And these practices, they actually created spatial injustices that continue to persist in almost all the cities in South Africa. So because of these spatial injustice that has been created by the apartheid systems, they actually secluded places where people reside. You would find that those who are rich, they manage to stay in nice homes, and those who are not, the poor, they stay in informal settlements where the services, they are poor. So we are saying that this historical outcome, it created a monofunctional and a low density that is encompassed with low-income residential areas on the periphery of the cities with limited related economic opportunity. Mind you, people, when they come to the cities, they are looking for better opportunities, but they can't afford to have such opportunities because where they are, they do not have the economic hubs. They are usually located in the city, and most of them, they are located outside the cities, which are at the periphery, which do not have economic opportunities so that people, they can actually fend themselves. So these historical laws, they actually shaped the urban pattern design, which created these isolated residential areas. So because of that, because they stay in remote and marginalized townships, they always have unfavorable conditions. This spatial fragmentation is secluded their communities. Because of that, they find it difficult to fend themselves, because even the public transportation that they need to use, some of them, they cannot afford to use public transport because they don't have the means to support themselves. So predominantly, human settlement strategies, they continue to deliver large-scale, peripheral, and income polarized housing development that is limited, with limited economic opportunities. So that's where now we are saying, we can go to the next slide. That's where now we are saying that why can't we situate local economic development at the center of human settlement so that it can drive towards achieving the goal for having resilient and self-sustaining settlements. So in this regard, local economic development, it entails the working together of local actors towards economic development to realize sustainable economic growth and development with an aim of the economic capacity and enhanced quality of life for all residents. So according to the SDG Goal 8, it also talks of providing decent work and economic growth. So we are saying that resilient and self-sustaining settlements, they should have a strong LED leg as one of its key pillars so that we can create resilient and self-sustaining settlements. This can be achieved by collaboration and partnership of multiple role players, and this includes the local, this encompasses the local government. In this regard, the municipalities have been mandated by the government of South Africa to spearhead this aspect of local economic development. So the municipalities or local government, they now have to work together with community-based groups, the non-government organizations, and the private sector, so that they can as well work with the people who are residing in that area so as to support their day-to-day basis. We can go to the next slide, and the next slide, it talks of joint design and implementation of strategies, unlocking the economic potential of the local area. So here we are saying that each and every area, be it an urban area or a rural area or formal or informal settlement, we need to factor out and identify the local resources that are in that place, in that area, so that we can actually help the people wherever they are residing, because the housing system on its own alone, it cannot support everyone. It cannot provide houses for everyone. So people, they need to be supported where they are. So we are saying that we need to develop the aspect of local economic development in those areas. So local municipalities now use the LED as a creative and innovative tool to support sustainable livelihoods, to support the local skills, identifying the resources that are in that area and ideas that they may have. So LEDs have various interventions that they can use. They can attract inward investment, and they can implement property-led city improvements. They can create jobs by supporting businesses, especially those who are into small enterprises. Usually they lack the finances to support their businesses. So we are saying that local municipalities, they can actually work together with the people in their dwelling places to support their businesses. Mind you, some of them, they are involved in informal businesses. Most of them, because they are living in formal settlements, they actually have informal businesses. So we are saying that local municipalities, they should be in a position to work together with people in their dwelling places so that they can be supported in their various businesses, in their various economic activities that they may want to embark on. So they can also as well upgrade the local infrastructure and upgrading human capital and labor skills. So we can go to the next slide.
Dr.
Yes.
Purity, can I use the opportunity to just indicate that we are on the 18-minute mark for you. So we're giving you about 5 more minutes to wind up. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So yeah, when we say that LED should be at the center of human settlements, we are actually saying that we need to put LED at the center of human settlements. When we do that, it actually leads us to resilient and self-sustaining settlements. Then we can have sustainable livelihoods, as shown on this diagram, whereby the municipalities, the civil society organizations, the private sector, and local communities, they work together towards the realization of that goal. Okay, you can go to the next slide. The recommendations for this, they are, unlike the apartheid planning and design, special injustices, current human settlements planning and design need to integrate and cooperate all stakeholders, role players, and communities to participate actively to develop resilience and self-sustaining settlements. A set of normative principles that will create livable, equitable, and sustainable, resilient and efficient spaces including supporting economic opportunities and social cohesion, must guide planning for human settlements, as well as settlement planning and financing have a significant role to play in overcoming the fragmentation of governance in the implementation of human settlements policy. So yeah, the LED policies and human settlement policies, they should be integrated together for a common goal, especially on the implementation part. They should be in a position to work together, the municipalities and the urban planning systems. They should be able to work together so that we can achieve this goal of having economic hubs that can actually support people wherever they are. So we can go to the conclusion slide, the last slide. So human settlements and LED is consistent with international development goals, which talks of, in this regard, is Goal 11 and Goal 8. So we are saying that human settlement development is a public service. So that makes it a basic human right for all the citizens in South Africa. And having said that, as well as the LED is a government initiative or a policy or a vehicle that aims to achieve certain policy outcomes, that is to improve the livelihoods of people. So we are saying that when you put LED at the center of human settlements, it can actually help us to have resilient and sustainable settlements. And this is very important because it improves the sustainable livelihoods of the low-income groups, those who cannot afford to reside in those economic areas with the opportunities. As we can see that many people in South Africa, the majority, they reside in the periphery of the city. Hence, the need for the linkages for human settlements and LED. So the global discussion on sustainability of human settlements, it emphasizes on the planning and design of human settlements as economic hubs. And in that regard, LED become of significance use in this context as to say, wherever people reside, they should be in a position to work, to play, and to pray, and to hold all their activities, no matter where they are residing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Purity, for your presentation. Before I invited you to present, I was remiss in not providing some guidance as to how we are proceeding, because obviously you had connectivity issues. So when we were setting the guidelines, you were not in connection with us. The format we adopted was that after your presentation, we would invite questions of the participants in the room, and we would spend about 5 or so minutes with you responding to those questions. And participants, we had indicated that you can ask the question directly to Dr. Purity, or you can write it out in the chat, and we'll get to those as we go along to ensure that everybody's questions are accommodated. Any questions for Dr. Purity on her presentation on local economic development and its link to the sustainability of human settlements? Any questions? Anyone at all to kick us off? And maybe while other participants are okay. All right, Mr. Idris has a question. Sir, go ahead and ask your question.
I must congratulate Dr. Purity and her collaborators for such a wonderful presentation and paper put out there. I have two issues. I was looking at the structure. I was looking at.
Sorry, I can't hear you properly.
Mr. Idris, I don't know whether there's a radio or TV in the background. We're struggling to hear you audibly.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Sorry?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but we can also hear another voice in the background that is sort of masking the clarity of what you're saying.
Okay. I don't know where it is coming from. Let me check.
And I think the struggle of the connections that
all right. Mr. Idris, while you sort that out, let me invite another question. I can see Prof. Chipungu's hand was up a moment ago. I'll come back to you in a moment while you sort that out. Professor Chipungu, you have a question?
Give us food for thought.
Good day, Prof.
Hello, Professor Chipungu. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, I was trying to type it because I'm in an area where there is a lot of communication, people presenting as well. So I hope you can hear me without any problem.
Yes, we can quite clearly, Prof.
Okay, good. Right, I was just listening to the presentation by Dr. Purity, and I think that's one of the areas which I'm interested in. The moment people talk about community engagement, or when they talk about co-production of any form of space which involves the community, I become more excited. Now, in this particular case, I would want to know the state of preparedness, or can I say the state of the mindset of the people themselves in terms of being responsive and accommodative to their initiatives, so that they can go ahead to participate in the production of local infrastructure to support the initiatives. There are many instances where you find that some of these initiatives are top-down, right? Maybe coming from the government, and where the people themselves are just able to tap into the government's initiatives. So do we have any evidence which shows the people themselves taking the initiative to participate in the co-production of space? And if there is any evidence of that nature, what measures are in place?
Thank you very much for this
to support that.
Let me just put my face on screen for a little bit.
All right, Dr. Purity, I don't know whether you heard the last part of Professor Chipungu's question clearly, because there was a bit of an interruption there, but please, if you can go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, sir. Prof.
I think he's done with his question. I think Prof. Chipungu is done with his question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think people themselves, they should be in a position to participate when they know of the economic, let me say, maybe the business retention, or let me say, okay, can you repeat your question again, sir?
Prof, sorry, I've just moved to a better place now. If you allow me, I can rephrase my question.
Yes, absolutely do.
Okay.
Go ahead, Professor Chipungu.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
All right,
you
Prof.
can.
I was a bit restricted in my previous space there, so I moved to a better place now. So I was saying that when you look at people see initiatives, and in most cases, they tend to tap into what the government dangles down. Now, we are at a stage in our development where we want initiatives to come from the people themselves, to engage with the government, so that at the end of the day, the space they are creating, the platform they are creating are platforms which are responsive and accommodative of their needs. So in this particular case, I would like to know the state of preparedness of the people themselves in terms of their attitude, their response to grouping themselves to take up challenges so that they initiate projects with a little assistance from the government. That's my first question. The second question is that do we have any structures in place or platforms which allow for this community participation so that they can fulfill their dreams? Those are my two questions.
Okay, yes. I think the problem that we are having is that the local people themselves, they usually don't want to participate, or maybe they lack the capacity to participate in the programs that they may be there. Like, for instance, the municipalities or the local government, since they spearhead this aspect of local economic development, usually they may find it difficult to access each and everyone in their dwelling places. I don't know if I have answered your question.
Yes, Doc, you did. I was more interested to find out in the event of the people lacking that interest or that inertia, what would happen to their projects which are led by the government or the municipalities? Would they continue to hang on?
In this regard, if people they do not participate themselves, these programs they cannot be sustainable, because each and everything for it to go forward, it needs the people themselves to be at the forefront of whichever development that may be introduced in their areas. So if they fail to participate fully, that's how these projects actually fail, because when they don't participate fully, there is no way these they can go forward. Because when we are talking about local economic development, it talks of working together for the municipalities, then NGOs, even the local people themselves. They should take up the slack and run with it. If they don't do that, it means that they fail dismally in all the projects that may be introduced in each and every area.
Thank you very much.
All right. We can then go back to Mr. Idris and see whether the problems are resolved. In fact, it turns out that the background noise we were hearing may not have been coming from yourself, from your area, Mr. Idris. Our apologies, please, if you can ask your question now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sort of, we can.
Can you hear me very well?
You sound a bit far off. Maybe get closer to your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
I don't know whether, Dr. Purity, can you hear Mr. Idris?
let him speak. Let me.
To try and ask your question, Mr. Idris, and we'll indicate whether the previous presenter who needs to answer your question can hear you.
Question is centered on the issue of creating resilient and
Still can't hear him. Maybe if he can type the question.
Mr. Idris, our proposal is that you type your question in the facility of chats, and we can read it out, and Dr. Purity can read it out and respond to it.
Okay.
Because we really are indeed struggling to hear you.
Okay. No problem.
All right. Any other question? Any other question while Dr. Idris types his question? Any other question from the room?
Prof, there's a
Dr.
question posed by, I think, Priscilla in the chat.
All right, let's have a quick look at that.
Unless it's an old question.
I think Priscilla was asking a question to our previous speaker, Dr.
Yes.
Guria, if
It's true.
I'm not wrong. That's what and
I think it's the same question, Prof.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Any other question from the room as far as the presentation on local economic development is concerned? Now, I have a quick question of my own, Dr. Purity, while we wait for Mr. Idris to type his question, and that has to do with issues of scale, because local economic development connotes some level of scale, a local level of scale, and that might be a neighborhood level, a precinct level. And my question would be around the approach to just getting that message out there to the residents, maybe of that local area, whatever you're defining it as, and how you initiate some of those aspects around creating, developing the local economy with them. Where does one start? Because it's possible to address local economic development from a very sort of abstract perspective, where it sounds like the thing to do, and the thing to do is to link it to government and to the private sector and collaboration and all of those things. But in actual fact, in entrenching it as a practice, where do you see the start point as? So for example, if we were to ask a peri-urban area, a peri-urban community, you want to introduce this aspect to them, how does one go about it? Where does one go to begin devolving it from an idea to something that people actually do? Your presentation sounded very much like it's a study-based, and I don't know whether there were any insights into that. Like, what are the methodologies by which you would get a community involved? Thank you.
Oh, this one it was a conceptual paper, but the methodology part, I'm going to introduce it. But this one was a conceptual paper. So I'm going to go into detail when I do the questionnaires and the likes. So to answer your question, I think the local municipalities, or let me say the actors, the NGOs, the local municipalities, maybe they need to do the community outreach, so that they can actually try and engage the local people and help them to identify the the aspects of the resources that they may have in their areas, because each and every area, it may have different resources. So each and every municipality, wherever they may be, they can actually do community outreaches and try and speak to the local people in that regard.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Purity. Mr. Idris now has his question typed out. So he has two questions actually. His first question, he says, is on creating resilient cities, and he asks, how does LED influence the spatial development of human settlements? How does LED influence the spatial development of human settlements? That's the first part of his question. The second part is on the link between LED and human settlements. And he asks, at what level of human settlement development process does LED come in? I suppose in the sequencing of events, at what point does LED come in? If you could respond to those questions as the last questions from your presentation, Dr. Purity, and then we would move forward to the next presentation. Thank you.
Let me see. Local economic development, this spatial injustices has already been created by the historical laws that have been there during the apartheid system. So the LED now comes in to support people wherever they are, no matter where they are residing in, whether it is an urban area or a rural area or a formal or informal area. LED now comes into place. Why? Because the local municipalities, each and every area, they have local municipalities. So now it's the duty of the local municipalities to now link and spearhead or create an environment that is conducive for, let's say, the local businesses or the local skills that the people in that area may have. And to answer the second question, the link between LED and human settlement, at what level of human settlement LED comes in? I think LED can come in at each and every stage, because people, they need to be supported day in, day out. They need jobs, they need they have various businesses, they need to support their livelihood strategies. So I think LED can be implemented at all stages. I don't think there is a specific time to say we should do it now. Although it's the LED itself, it works with the capacity of the local municipality members or those who spearhead the initiative. They should have the know-how on how they can implement whatever they are doing. So I don't know if I have responded to those questions.
We are going to leave it at that, Dr. Purity, in the interest of time, and we are also saying that, and as Prof. Chipungu is actually in the room, we are saying that it would be great to have opportunities for cross-pollination of some of these ideas, and also to pursue some of the discussions that have been initiated here further. It occurs to me, for example, and it's a pity, Dr. Purity, you had connectivity issues when Dr. Guria presented, because he introduced a social innovation model, which seemed very interesting in providing the space for a nonprofit organization, or what we would call an NGO in South Africa, to actually take leadership of development. And it seems to me that this model could very well be something that could be applicable even in the LED space. There were some interesting innovations there around people creating a compact with the government, where the government actually allows them the space to take leadership of the development that they want in their area. And it seems to me there's no reason why that couldn't happen even in the development of local economic LED projects at the local level. So maybe it would be interesting for you to see Dr. Guria's presentation, see whether there are ideas that might very well cross-pollinate your very own as far as LED is concerned.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Purity. We will now move forward with the next presentation, and I'm going to invite the collaborators on the presentation on the implication of social spatial exclusive housing on transport mode choice in Abuja. The presenters there are Nuni Vachaku Blama and Professors Matthew Dayomi, Hangwelani Magidimisha Chipungu, and Prof. Chipungu. Prof. Chipungu, I know you're here, so you can advise us on who's going to take the lead in this one. Has Prof. Chipungu left the room? Musa? Oh no, Prof. Chipungu is here. Prof. Chipungu,
it's Blama is supposed to be taking that presentation. I wonder if he's around.
It is Blama. I'm around.
Yes. he's right here. All right. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Blama.
Okay. Thank you so much for.
Once again, sorry to interrupt you. Once again, quite quickly, we'll indicate at the 15-minute mark so that you get 5 more minutes to wind up, so that you're able to wind up tidily without feeling rushed to the end of your presentation. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this paper here that is titled The Implication of Social Special Exclusive Housing on Transport Mode Choice in Abuja. And I present this paper on behalf of my senior colleagues, as you can see clearly here. I can't see the slide, please. Hello, I don't know if you could help me with the slides. Okay. Okay, I don't know if I may start, but as I earlier said, I appreciate the opportunity, and this is the title of the paper I want to present: the implication of social spatial exclusive housing on transport mode choice in Abuja. I am Nuni Blama, PhD candidate at the UKZN, and I present this on behalf of my senior colleagues here. Next slide, please. These are the areas that we hope to cover by the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. We are all aware that over half of the world's population today live in urban areas. And this population, they have most of their footprint in Africa. That's the urban population growth, have most of their footprint on the African continent. And Africa is also well known, for its high level of poverty growth. In fact, that's why the World Economic Forum has documented that the 1.1 billion population of the world is expected to double, or of the continent, so to say, is expected to double by the year 2050, and 80% of this growth expected to come, from the urban centers, urban areas, especially at the slum part of the urban areas. With this scenario created, we can't afford to have a city in Africa with this population growth and poverty level. We can't afford to have a city in Africa that is so exclusive, giving priority to the high income earners or to the elite of elite citizens of any African country. And so is the case that we seem to have in a country as in a city in Nigeria, which we will see, as we go on. And this city is our case study today, the city of Abuja, which is the capital city of Nigeria. Plethora of researches then have been, however, carried out on such issues, especially on how cities can be exclusive in their structure and house location. But a few research work have been carried out, in the area of how a city was established, what motivated the establishment of a city, and how the structure of the city ended up shaping itself as a result of the motive of establishing the city, and how the structure of the city also influenced mode choice of the excluded population. So next slide, please. As a result, we now try to see how we can bridge this gap by carrying out certain objectives, one of which is to determine the motives behind the establishment of Abuja and the emerging structure of the city, what then informs the structure of the city. And we also intend to show how the social spatial structure of the city is delineated by house location of different socioeconomic groups in the metropolitan area, and how also the structure of the city determine the mode choices, transport mode choices in the metropolitan area, especially mode choices by the excluded population. Next slide, please. Before we move on, it's important that we get to understand the context of the study area, which is Abuja. Abuja is the federal capital city of Nigeria, which we call here FCC, and it is located within a territory, a state-like territory called the Federal Capital Territory. And it's a new town developed, it's a new town, that was established in 1976, but most of the development of Abuja was carried out in the 80s and 90s. And the population, the area coverage for the city itself within the territory is just 3% of the territory, but the other space of the Federal Capital Territory is left for a kind of a suburban development, or what they call the satellite town development. Abuja is also one of the fastest growing cities in the world, going by UN a kind of a prediction. The city has the population of about 3.5 million people, and has the population growth of over 5.6% per annum. And the suburban part of the city, it's growing faster at almost 35%, annually. So these are the areas that we need to understand about Abuja for us to get to understand the issues of exclusivity and also model choice in the area by the excluded. Next slide, please. This is just a representation of Abuja. We could see Abuja is centered at the top left corner of the map. You could see Abuja there at the center and Lagos, at the border. And here I want to give us another background that Abuja was took over the capital status from Lagos in 1979 when it was first established, due to certain reasons, which as we proceed, we may see in findings of our results. Next slide, please. This is the method that we applied in this research. Strictly, it was on a qualitative, method that we applied, and one of the method, the qualitative, is a literature review to determine the motives behind the establishment of Abuja and the emerging urban structure. We also carried out open-ended questionnaire on workers in Abuja within the city itself and to determine their house locations and why they choose to live where they live. We also carried out a focus group discussion with experts, or let me say, top officials of relevant ministries that are related to, let's say, land use planning, transportation, and environment. So we have had about 8 participants in a focus group and also about 320 questionnaires distributed and answered or responded to by workers within the city. Next slide, please. And it was the analysis, let me just move back a little bit. The analysis was based on, it was a thematic analysis, though carried out and analyzed by, using in vivo 12. So these are the findings of our discussion from this one is from the literature review. And here we can see the motive behind the establishment of Abuja, which we found to be classified under 2 groups, a kind of the disclosed motives and the undisclosed motives by the elite class that have initiated the movement to Abuja from Lagos. And the disclosed motives here, we can see these are some negatives that were found, with Lagos, which, Lagos is a city that is located at the coast. It's coastally located, by the sea, and they see it as not central at all. And it's also dominated by one single tribe, and Nigeria is a multiculturally diversified country, and religion and tribal issues are very sensitive in Nigeria. So they see Lagos as very unsuitable as the capital city of Nigeria. We also have administrative conflict, which has to do with or had to do with Lagos being the state capital and at the same time federal capital. So who owns the land? Who gives order for whatever that goes on in the city? So these are some issues that were seen as that made Lagos very unsuitable for capital city. And also, a committee was set, to see a better place for the location of a new capital city, and Abuja happened to be one of the best place that was cited because it was a vast land a virgin land, and also centrally located, accessible, from all nooks and crannies of the country. And so these are some of the factors that called for the establishment of Abuja that were carried out in the white paper, that called for the establishment of the city. But there were also some undisclosed motives, according to some researchers, and who theorized them in different ways. They also saw that there may be some hidden factors, one of which, they see Abuja as the expansion of the European settlement during colonization, because the European settlement then, which was called European quarters in Nigeria, was a kind of an exclusive settlement with all requisite infrastructure lining the natives, so it was a kind of a better place to live. And after the colonial period, this kind of settlement, the European quarters, were handed over to the elite class, who took over power from the colonial masters. And those settlements were renamed as government reserve areas. So some researchers thought, could this be the reason why they created Abuja as to a kind of an expansion or extension of the exclusivity of their kind of a neighborhood? Because Lagos was found to be so congested, and it was a kind of easy for coup plotting, because the initiative for the creation of Abuja was under military government. So Abuja would not be easy for people to strategize. So these are some of the factors that were not included in the white paper, one of which also Nigeria then discovered oil, and they experienced the oil boom. Money was very available, that they thought even to have the ability to build a new city from scratch, so they maybe have been carried away by such factors. Next slide, please. Going by the second objective, which we administered questionnaire on workers of the city, 3 locations were identified as where workers within this main city, Abuja, live. Some live or lived at the FCC, that's within the main city itself. Some lived at the satellite suburbs, and some at nearby settlements. The nearby settlements are areas outside the territory, that's the FCT itself, but in some states surrounding the city. And most of the setting in the suburban areas and the nearby settlements are a kind of not well planned, but the FCC is a planned settlement. Next, please. So we move further to find out reasons why people chose to live where they live. And we found that people that live within the FCC, that's the Federal Capital City, they chose the location because of the safety and security available there. Also the serenity of the environment, well-planned environment, and they also believe that they can afford because they have the money. So it means the wealthy live within the city. And looking also at the reasons for having house vacation at the suburbs and the neighboring state, we found out that they first look at not how safe the place is, but they looked at affordability, of course, of housing and other living expenses at the neighborhood. That's the suburban areas and the nearby states. So we see their priority is, can they afford? Well, in the main city, they can afford, so they choose for the safest place in the metropolitan area. Next, please. So carrying out a kind of a word frequency query to determine the word that was used most in the response to the question, we found the word afford still topping the chart, kind of. Affording what? We could see down it, accommodation, housing, and living expenses. And these are the major factor, or this is the major factor, to determine where one lives within Abuja. So affordability. Next, please. Also interrogating, or let me say, having discussion with participants in a focus group discussion, was carried out to see how the location of the city, sorry, I have been distracted by something here, to see how the structure of the city might have influenced mode choice. We know that urban structure, if exclusive, has a lot of implication on other sectors. But in this research, we intend to look at mode choice, transport mode choice by the excluded. So we see from the discussion, this is a kind of a mind map, so to say, of the outcome of the focus group discussion, and the structure was found to be monocentric in nature, the FCC at the center and suburban areas around it. We also found that the city is adopted what they call a neighborhood concept, and also the ideological part of the design of the city is that it should be exclusive. So, and what are the consequences of the exclusivity or the exclusive nature of Abuja? We have found that, from the focus group discussion, that the indigenes, the natives of the land, before the establishment of Abuja were resettled, but at the suburbs, far away from the main city. Even those that also had the opportunity of benefiting from what they call owner-occupier houses from the low-income areas were enticed by the elite and the rich class, to sell their houses. So they were given high price offer on a house that they had no choice but to accept that high price to go settle at the suburb. We also have high rental costs within the main city. In Abuja, you don't pay for house rent, monthly, you pay annually. Some even demand for 2 years at a go, as a sum you pay. So that's beyond what the poor can afford. So we also have, I can't see the other one clearly, my computer. Okay, we also have demolition of illegal houses within the city. The poor had their way into the city, settling at informal settlement, but the government did not find a way of a kind of inculcating or bringing them into the city to see how they can involve them in the plan of the city. Rather, their illegal structures were demolished, and they had to resort to the suburbs. So we look at how this goes to why the low-income earners live at the suburb in Abuja. And coupled with the influx of the low income into the city generally, because it's one of the best places in Nigeria to live in and a place of opportunity, employment, people now live at the suburb, and their target is the main city, which is the FCC. And in terms of transportation, there is no kind of good public mass transit in the city. So they had to resort to the use of some modes that are environmentally unsustainable, like use of motorbikes or high emitter vehicles that are old and rickety kind of vehicles and taxis into the city, and that impact seriously on the environment. So we also have seen that the neighborhood concept adopted can only help people within the city to move within their neighborhood to get certain household needs, but not to work, because in a neighborhood concept, they have like corner shops and playgrounds just within a neighborhood, but not for kind of employment areas within the neighborhood. So going to work will also entail using your car. So that's how also the structure of the city influenced the use of private cars, which is environmentally unsustainable. Next slide, please.
Mr. Nunye, can I indicate that you have about 3 minutes to wind up?
Okay, please.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, by way of discussion, we can now say that the establishment of Abuja was established, or was underpinned by undisclosed factors, but under the disguise of disclosed factors. And we can also say that the factors depicted Abuja project as a common good, but that narrative was a kind of betrayed by the structure of the city, because Abuja doesn't seem to be for the common good. It doesn't seem to be for everybody, as the earlier narrated. So the structure excluded the poor. Next, please. And affordability of housing, we can also say, can be explained by the rich in a different way, from how the poor sees it. When the rich class see affordability as their own personal ability to afford house at every location within the city, the poor looks at, in Abuja, affordability as that particular location that they can afford, that particular low-cost location that they can afford. And the rich also prioritize security and serenity as to determine where they stay in the city, while the poor looks at where they can afford. And the term security may mean in Abuja or may mean to the rich as protection, of intruders, protection of their neighborhood, from intruders, while the poor looks at the absence of intruders into their neighborhood. That's why they can stay at the suburb, because they have no level of wealth that is attractive for, let me say, criminals. So next slide, please. By implication, we can say Abuja is a divided city, as described by Newman 2008. And this comes with a lot of consequences, one of which is transport mode choice that is unsustainable environmentally. Next slide, please. And by way of conclusion, we just want to show that this presentation is a kind of a novel, in the sense that it tries to link the motive behind the establishment of Abuja with the structure that emerged, and also the mode choice as a consequence of the structure. So this is the area that we want to kind of stress at, as in the mind structure and the physical structure of Abuja determine cost for exclusive kind of house location for the low income, and also it brought about an unsustainable mode choice in the city. And by way of our recommendation, we recommend a kind of a further study, and also the agencies that are relevant to this, to look at factors for future development of new towns. If there is going to be any new town development from scratch, the hidden factors need to be identified first of all, so that it does not become exclusive to some groups of people. We also need to strategize on how to make Abuja an inclusive city, by way of having house locations within the city for the low income. This will help reduce mode choices that are unsustainable. It will help non-motorized travel, from house to work. Next slide, please. Next and next. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blama. We have reached the stage of asking questions. with regard to Mr. Blama's presentation. But before we do that, can I just quickly establish from Musa whether the last presenter, Ms. Ayanda, is with us, so that we can get a sense of how we are positioned for time. I cannot see her name in the participant whatever, but is she here?
I can't see her. We couldn't get hold of her, so I don't think she'll be presenting.
All right. Okay. All right. So in fact, Mr. Blama's is the last presentation for this room. All right. So let's then take questions on Mr. Blama's presentation. Anyone with a question? I think Mr. Idris has a question. Mr. Idris, you have a question for Mr. Blama, or is that the old hand that is up? Sorry, Mr. Idris? All right, we seem to be going through the same struggle we did. And if Mr. Idris can hear us, if he can kindly, Lerato, would you indicate to Mr. Idris to please ask, type out his question if he does indeed have a question, while we take another question as he sorts himself out. Any other question from the room?
Who's talking here?
Any question? Mr. Blama, perhaps I could ask you a question while other participants
try to engage this.
think about what they might want to ask you. You have painted a picture of what has emerged as a socio-spatially exclusionary housing structure in Abuja. And you have given the motivations for why it has unfolded in the way that it has.
So that's why
my question is,
I sort of
given that Abuja is, I suppose, what you would call loosely a newly established city, well, vis-a-vis, if you're looking at it against the older cities in Lagos, is there any difference in its social spatial structure and its exclusionary character, as you have characterized it, compared to, say, Lagos or Ibadan, some of the other older cities? Because one would imagine establishing a new city that one would have taken toll of whatever the issues were, the social spatial exclusion in cities such as Lagos and others. Why have those characteristics repeated themselves, or have they only repeated themselves to a certain extent? In other words, are they not as serious in Abuja as they are in the older cities? What's the sort of status if you were to look at them against each other? If you weren't looking at Abuja exclusively, but you were looking at those issues as against the way they present in the older cities of Nigeria. What's the picture there like?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I will speak in the context of mod choice still, because that's the area that the area of effect of the structure that I am looking at. Abuja is actually different from a place like Lagos and Ibadan in terms of urban structure and mode choices, that's transport mode choices, in the sense that Lagos wasn't first established as an exclusive city, even from its inception, but Abuja was, because they established it to kind of be exclusively an administrative town for Nigeria. So that's one of the difference. And in terms of the structure adopted, Abuja adopted a kind of a garden city concept in their development. And we know garden city concept, is a kind of American style of a kind of a urban development that would have a kind of suburban locations within. depending on the central area. So in Abuja, we have suburban areas and we have a central city. Lagos is just a massive city in structure without suburban per se, and you could see that the transportation aspect of Lagos, you can have it, in that case, you can have a two-way traffic within Lagos, okay, the implication on that, or let me say the advantage of that, on transportation, especially the mass transit, they can have passengers to and fro because the employment areas are equally spread across, so to say, not as fairly as we would want, but better off than in Abuja. But in Abuja, the employment areas are strictly, that's the major ones within the federal capital city, and the low income who cannot afford living within the city must stay at the suburb, and they move into the city at the time during peak hours. And there's traffic idling, or let me say vehicle idling, while going back at peak periods to convey passengers into town. Well, that one is hardly happening in a place like Lagos. I don't know much about Ibadan actually. So the structure of Abuja is different, and the effect of the structure on transport mode choices by especially the excluded population is also different. I don't know if I answered the question, please. I cannot hear, please.
Sorry, Mr. Blama. I think you have answered the question, and we are going to leave that line of questioning at that, because we have another question coming from Mr. Idris, which is available to you, Mr. Blama, because it is on the chat. He asks, what is the social spatial exclusive housing as applied in this paper? I'm not sure whether he's asking you to sort of go into the conceptual explanation of what the concept actually means to you. And he asks, why does the study ignore diagnosis of the city and regional master plan to understand the intended form and structure of the city, which could have explained better the development spread of the city? Mr. Blama, maybe you want to take that slowly and figure out what Mr. Idris is asking. And he adds that the city should have confirmed its findings from the existing body of literature. Your comments on that?
Okay, from responding to the first question, the understanding of social exclusiveness in Abuja is about the low-income groups or brackets that have not been well taken care of in the city, because the low income, even the average, or let me say the middle income class, hardly can live within Abuja, and the government has no particular model in how to make every group of socioeconomic class to have access to the city in terms of housing. So because of the exclusion of a particular socioeconomic group, that's why I tagged this as special exclusiveness of the low income within Abuja. And going by the second question, he was trying to find out if there's a reason for the adoption of the structure of Abuja as it is today. Yes, of course, they have their reasons for coming up with this structure of suburban kind of development and also having an exclusive city. Like I earlier said, the city was initially designed for the elite class. And it's clear about it. They say it's an administrative capital of Nigeria. So they did not expect the rate of influx of the low income into Abuja. But one thing they have forgotten also is that Abuja is like the area of an area of opportunity for Nigerians, high rate of unemployment. People would have to find their way to wherever they see a greener pasture. So they moved in mass to Abuja, but the city are kind of repelling the coming of the low income. So the structure of Abuja might be, or they have their reasons for adopting the pattern they adopted in terms of the master plan of Abuja, but as it is today, it is not working. So that's why we call for a kind of a restructuring of the city by seeing how the low income can be a kind of considered, because initially they were not well considered. But now that they can't help it, that's the elite class, for us to ameliorate the issues on ground, environmental issues especially, we need to re-strategize to have a kind of inclusivity in the city.
All right, Mr. Idris, I don't know if you feel your question has been covered appropriately, but while you give that some thought, does anyone else in the room have a question on Mr. Blama's presentation? Does anybody else have a question on Mr. Blama's presentation? All right, I think that brings us to the end of the discussions. Your last question, Mr. Idris, yes, go for your last question and then we can conclude the session. Mr. Idris, all right. Mr. Blama, I'm understanding Mr. Idris to say that he doesn't feel you have covered the second part of his question, which is, he says the study should have confirmed its findings from the existing body of literature. Do you have a comment on that?
I didn't get his question clearly.
My understanding, and Mr. Idris can correct me if I'm wrong, is he's saying, he's asking, have your findings, have you found your findings to be consistent with whatever has been documented in existing literature on this issue?
Yes, of course, I have. It's just that because of the nature of this presentation, I cannot begin to give the literature review, especially in terms of the discussion. But he could see in the conclusion part, I made mention of the divided city by Newman. And that also, if we had dig deep into it, we saw how Newman talked about how exclusive city is, in such a way that the elite class always tend to have a kind of a protection around them, guarding their neighborhood with dogs, guarding their neighborhood with fences, guarding their neighborhood with even real estate prices, such that the poor will find it difficult to come amidst them, and also send the low income to the periphery of the town. So Newman has classified that, and in my the discussion area, you could clearly see I cited Newman and many others that this platform will not allow us to discuss them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Blama, Dr. Purity. Thank you,
Prof.
Dr.
Can I come in? Last one.
Yes, Prof. Chipungu.
Thank you. It's just a short one now.
Okay,
right.
Sure.
It's just a short question. Thank you, Blama, for that presentation. It was actually a very good presentation. I just wanted to raise an issue on transport, because to me, I think transport is a very good mechanism which can be used to achieve spatial inclusion. Now, if you look back at the colonial city, you'll find that infrastructure in the form of the rail line was used as a line of divide, between those with high income and those without, but more so between the colonial settlers and the indigenous people. If you look at the apartheid city, same can be said again. where you find that the road was used as a tool to ensure that there was no proximity between different races. So it was a tool of segregation, if I can use that word. Now, transport planning in this particular case, I'm sure in the post-colonial and post-apartheid period, can be seen as a key instrument that can be used to achieve spatial equity among all different groups of people. So, Blama, what I want to find out in this particular context is that to what extent can we make use of the master plan in Nigeria at the moment to make sure that we are able to achieve spatial equity through transportation?
Okay, thank you, Prof, for the question. And I see that to be a kind of a good strategy, actually, transportation, to bridge the gap, you know, or to conquer distance between the suburban areas and the main city in the context of Abuja. And even the government of the administration of Abuja had tried a kind of coming up with the urban mass transit that could help convey people from the suburban areas into the city. And as I speak presently, there has been a kind of a rail transit from the suburban to the city, where they see it can help reduce the level of traffic, and also will have the low income have access to the city through public mass transit and through public mass transit in general. But the case with Abuja and most African cities is that, like you earlier said in your opening remark, it's not about the policy, it's not about the plan, but about implementation. Even in the master plan of Abuja, you could see these things are spelled out, especially the rail system from the suburbs to the city. But since creation of the city till date, no functioning, let me say, rail system into the city. So maybe as a part of our recommendation, we will find out why this is not working in Abuja and how we can make them work. But as to close the gap in terms of the spatial difference between the employment area and the suburban areas, actually is the need for mass transit system, you know, into the city. That's it, you know, and because in Abuja, people don't only use their private cars. You will find even private cars, so to say, like being used as illegal taxis to convey people into town and bring them back because of the ineffectiveness of the mass transit in the city. So public mass transit is the way to go, and it must be effective.
Thank you, Prof. Right. I think I'm answered.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Chipungu. Thank you, Mr. Blama, for that response. I think in as much as we would like to continue, we have overshot the time substantially, and I thank you all for the indulgence and for staying on while we saw to the conclusion and ensured that every presenter got a reasonable deal. I suppose the takeaway from this session was that the exclusion issues and the are as many as there were presentations. If we start from Dr. Guria's presentation, it was around about housing exclusion, conflated with racial exclusion. And my takeaway there that enthused me greatly was the model that was emerging there of social innovation and the way it can help people to reclaim a space for themselves while ensuring that they are not removed from it, that they stay in it, and that they drive whatever development happens there. And given that this is what we wanted to be able to do with this symposium, I think there are certainly seeds there that could germinate and could spread to other areas of exclusion that we have looked at. Dr. Purity looked at it from the point of view of the exclusionary character, particularly the economic exclusionary character of housing low-income residential developments in South Africa, given their peripheral locations. They are predominantly peripheral locations, and the creation of enclaves of poverty where local economic development needs to be the intervention. And already we could see the sort of cross-pollination between some of the issues she was raising and some of some elements of the model that Dr. Guria spoke about that could begin to address some of those issues of local economic development. Mr. Blama has talked about settlement formation and how it could very well inadvertently create spaces, social spatial exclusionary character within a city, even a city that was planned as Abuja was. So a lot of food for thought as far as inclusion and exclusion is concerned. A pity we didn't hear the other two presentations, but we are going to have to take what we did here, which was very, very impactful, each in its own way. And also to remind the participants in the group and the presenters that we are pursuing this issue of inclusivity tomorrow as well. And you may want to hear what other issues are raised there and how they intersect with the issues you raised here. But for now, you have our gratitude, the presenters, as well as the participants for staying on and making this an interesting and fruitful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.